All right, we'll get stuff started if you want. Welcome, good morning. Thanks for being here. Week 2, you braved week 1 and came back, so thanks for that. That was kind of you. I'll go over a couple quick things before we actually jump into it. If you missed last week, I know some asked about notes. I have last week's notes. If you weren't here, I'll tell you how I do notes real quick. I don't do like fill in the blank or anything like that. I kind of hate fill in the blank because usually you just look for that magic word that fits in the blank, and then you kind of forget about the rest of the sentence, and you're not like processing it as a thought normally. So what I do is on one side, it's just, these are straight out of the page I have right here where I teach from, so it's just the same thing right there. They're pretty kind of just baseline. It is not anything fancy. There's not a lot of explanation. And then on the back is just an extra space for you to write notes. So I'll give you guys this week's if you want to pass it around. What I do ask, though, is if you're taking notes in the class, don't look at the side that I have printed out with all the points, just because I want you to write down what sticks out to you. That way it's memorable and you're going, hey, this might be something I can use. And if you flip it and you wrote the same thing, awesome. If you didn't, you still have this. And if you missed a week, you'll still have this to go back over. It may need some more explaining, but I kind of did that on purpose because I love it if you had somebody to partner up with. If I know some of you guys are in a small group, or maybe you just want to get 2 people, 3 people together and say, hey, if I missed this week, can we swap notes? You explain this point to me or this. I think that'd be really, really cool. Even cooler if you guys wanted to talk more in depth about it. I know personally, if I had somebody to help me out and talk, with me through apologetic stuff, it would have helped me so much on my kind of journey through this. So I'll hand these out, you guys, if you want to. Here, Mike, get you started. If you just want to pass one down, you can do that. We are doing a video recording. Some of you guys asked me about that, and I had some other people ask if I was going to do it or if I could do it for them. So I'll try not to look at it. The little red light gets me every time, and I keep staring at it awkwardly. But so if you keep glancing over, that's why, because I keep getting distracted by the flashing lights. But we are going to do it. So if you miss a week, you will be able to go back and watch. We're going to post them on YouTube. I don't have that channel or any of those up yet. We had some stuff with MDI. If you guys don't know what that is, the Crossing does something called Ministry Development Institute online, and I think they're going to kind of take this class and morph it into a MDI class. So I had to make sure, can I post this? What are we going to do? And square that away. So we're all good on that. So we will post these. They should be ready next week. You should at least be able to watch the first week and then hopefully this week by next week. So I'll let you guys know what that is and get you the link and all that if you need it, if you want it. And the other thing is I have a list of resources, and I'll give these. If you want one, you don't have to take one. This is totally optional. But you can come get this for me at the end of class. This is just stuff that I suggest. So I have books, and then kind of next to the books is just what they kind of talk about. So there's different theories, and we're going to cover most of these. That's why I put these on here, because we'll actually talk about some of the different apologetic theories that they're going through. I wasn't going to give this to you until 2 weeks from now, just because I wanted to cover some more material first before we kind of jumped into it. But I had some people asking, some people saying, oh, I checked this guy out and this guy out, which is super cool. I'll keep doing that. But I just thought, well, if you're going to start digging now, why not just make this available? So if you want this, you can come get it. There's books right here. These are podcasts. If you like listening when you drive, I love doing that, especially long distance stuff. I always get podcasts and listen to them. So these are some of the things. You're going to see a lot of repeats. Like I told you, I will say Ravi Zacharias a million times. You'll be sick of him by the time the class is over. But he's on every single one of these. On the back is YouTube guys. I don't know if you guys like watching video too, but there's these guys do debates. They have apologetic whole sermons and whole courses that you can actually take on YouTube. So there's some really cool resources, but there's some guys you can search here. So these are available for you after class. Other than that, that's all I got. Were there any questions about last week or how we do class stuff that I may have missed? No? Okay, cool. Well, we'll pray and then jump into it. God, thank you for another morning, another day. It's a new day to learn more about you, to give you glory and praise and honor, and to worship you in a new way, God. I pray for this morning through the class that we are able to sharpen our minds for you, Lord. That we're able to find answers and reasons for the faith and hope that we have so that we can share that with others. God, we love you, and we just pray that everything that we do and say just reflects you today. And we pray these things in your Son's holy name. Amen. All right. This is the week. I got to take a breath. I was the most nervous for because it's kind of where, the rubber hits the road. Last week was kind of the big, on-ramp to Apologetics. This is kind of a big introduction. This is why I like it. This is why I think it's important. This is why you should learn it or want to learn it. And this week we're just going to kind of jump right into some of the theory stuff. But it's going to be fun, so hopefully it goes well. We're going to talk about worldviews today. And this is kind of a big one. Like I told you last week, we're going to fly really, really fast through a lot of this stuff. So there's books and books and books just on worldviews. There's, whole semesters. One of my interns just told me, he's like, oh yeah, I spent a whole semester on worldviews. And I'm like, I got 30 minutes. So it's like, it's fun, but we'll get through it. Worldview, you may have heard of this term. Some of you may know about this. It kind of became popular like in the 90s, early 2000s. It was kind of like this hot word, like this key word that kind of came up. And it kind of emerged from sort of this postmodern thought. It kind of started coming out in philosophy in the 1900s. It became way more prevalent. And I'm not saying, if you know what postmodernism is, we'll kind of define that later. But I'm not saying it's like a result of that, but it kind of helps spur it on. A worldview is really just this, so we'll define it. It's a set of assumptions or assertions by which you view the world. Side note, I'm probably the worst speller known to man, so if I do something wrong, just tell me. Apparently I put an E in history last week. I don't know, but if you see something, just be like, Rob, that's not it. So it's a set of assumptions or assertions through which you view the world. So if you're going to make this really, really simple, just simply, it's the way you view the world. Get it? Worldview. And that's where they get the name from. So it's really just saying you have a certain way that you view the world. Now, this is super, super important, actually. And there's a really good reason that I was like, okay, this is going to be the first thing we actually talk about when it comes to apologetics and kind of the philosophy side, because it's important that you guys kind of start with a basic understanding of worldviews before we start jumping into other theories, other stuff. Worldviews are basically, when it comes down to it, how we define somebody else's beliefs. So we look at someone, they don't see the world the same way I do. Or maybe, you look at someone with a whole nother religion, you're going, man, they have a totally different view of how the world works, how it came to be, why we're here, all these big questions. And so we were trying to define those differing things because we were noticing, okay, even somebody who believes kind of the same thing, even, you and me, who we both say, okay, we believe Jesus, we're Christians, we believe in God, we probably have a bunch of areas where we're going, well, we don't quite line up here, we don't quite line up here on this and the way that I view the world. And so that's where they kind of came up with these world views as a way to define all these different views that were going on, all these different ways that people assumed the world worked, or they asserted that the world was working. Here's why it's a big deal. Everyone has a worldview. Absolutely everyone has a worldview. You have a worldview, I have a worldview, everyone you've ever seen has a worldview. And this is huge because they may not have taken the time to define their worldview, but they have one. You may not have ever heard the term worldview, but you have one. And you may have not even taken the time to define your worldview, but you do have one, because everybody has a worldview. And this is why this is important. There's no such thing as like a neutral worldview where you just kind of don't really have one and you're just going to pick what comes along. That doesn't exist. Everybody has a worldview. And it's incredibly important to at least be familiar with that. At least be familiar that every single person you talk to has a worldview. Because if they're going to ask you a question about your faith, if they're going to say, well, if God's so good, then why? Or how can you possibly believe this? I mean, if they're going to ask you a question, you at least need to know, okay, get in this mindset, what worldview are you coming from? Why are you asking me this question? And we're going to jump into that a little bit at the end, but it's so, so important when you go to talk to someone about your faith, to share someone about your faith, to give your answer, your apologetic, for why you believe what you believe, you need to know this person has a worldview. It's probably different than mine. And you need to look and be able to kind of assess. Because sometimes, and I would actually venture to say most of the time, the best thing to do when someone asks you a question, if they go, hey, how can you even be a Christian? How can you believe that? How can you believe in God? 9 times out of 10, I would venture to say the best thing to do is not to just straight up answer and be like, well, let me tell you. The best thing to do is probably ask a question back, because you're going to try and at least need to know, okay, where are you coming from? In your view of how things works, where are you coming from? That way you can provide the best answer, the most informed answer. And we'll jump a little more into that in a second. But here's what a worldview does. A worldview answers the 4 big questions about life. Now, this is big, and not everyone has defined this, okay? So you may ask them, well, what do you think about this question or this one, this? And they may go, I have no idea. But that's okay. Here are the big questions. It's origin, meaning, morality, and then destiny. So we'll just real quick define. Most of you probably can figure out what this is, but origin is, where did we come from? Actually, I don't want this to get too messy. Okay. Meaning is, what is the meaning of life? So, and I know I use the word to define the word, so if any of you are like crazy about that, you're technically not supposed to use the same word to define its own meaning, but let me have a pass on that one. Morality is what is good and what is evil. So how do we know what good is or what evil is? And then lastly, destiny is what happens when we die. So, or where do we go? So every worldview answers these 4, I want to say basic, but these are actually pretty huge questions, right? Like only the 4 biggest questions about life ever asked. Here's an easy one. What's the meaning of life? Okay. But it's important to understand this because a worldview will answer this. If you're going to look at an opposing worldview or even your own worldview, and you're going to go, is this true? Is this correct? And you're looking for a way to test it, you're going to test it against these 4 questions. So if someone says, I believe this and this, then you know, okay, so where do you think that we came from? What does that mean the meaning of life is? How do I know what good is? How do I know what evil is? How should I treat people? How should I act? And then what happens ultimately when I die? Those are the 4 big questions. Now, here's the thing. In order to answer these, because most of them, most religions, most worldviews will have individual answers for these questions that you can look at and go, okay, like that, I can get that. I can kind of go with that. But if you're going to start testing and going, but is this true? Is this right? Does this make sense? There's 2 kind of tests that these 4 questions all have to pass in order for you to go, okay, this is making sense. This is becoming clear. This seems to align. The 2 tests are correspondence and coherence. I hope I spelled coherence right. Maybe. Is that right? Coherence. Yeah, sort of. Okay. Thank you. Smart people, whoever knows how to spell. Correspondence and coherence. So correspondence, and I'm going to mess you guys again because I'm going to use the same word to define it, is does it correspond to reality? If you want to make it easier, is does reality kind of affirm the answer? So I'll put does it correspond to reality, but if you're going to freak out on me for that, you can change it if you want. So, does it correspond to reality? Which is saying, okay, so when you answer origin, how we got here, does that seem to line up with what I can look at and view in reality? Does that seem to kind of make sense? When you answer meaning, so what is the meaning of life? You say, well, I believe this, and so this is the meaning of life. Can I look at reality and go, okay, this is seeming to line up with reality. So that's what the correspondence is. Is it saying, do these kind of correspond? Do these make sense? Does reality affirm the answers that you're giving me for each of these four huge questions? Now, the coherence is usually where things kind of fall apart. Most worldviews, I will say, most worldviews can kind of answer each of these four questions on their own relatively well and align them with reality. Most, not all. There's some really wacko ones where I'm just like, seriously? Like, really? But most of the time you can get a pretty decent answer for each one question. Where they seem to fall apart is cohere, which means do all of these correspond to themselves? Do they cohere? When I put them all together as one, so does this kind of go along with this answer, and this answer go along with this, and this go along with this? When I put them together as one, do they still make sense? That's huge. That tends to be where most worldviews kind of break up and fall apart. They tend to have some friction when you're saying, does that cohere with itself? So coherence is, does it correspond to itself? So these are the two tests. So we have origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Now, if I'm going to answer a worldview, we have an answer for each one of these, and they have to do it if it's going to be sufficient to sustain itself for me to go, okay, this seems to be real. They have to correspond to reality, and then they have to cohere to themselves. So they have to make sense together and have something outside of itself where I'm going, okay, I can see this. This is relating to reality. Now, I'm going to give you a couple more terms, so keep sticking with me. We'll go through some examples and fill out some stuff. But if it's going to correspond to reality, there's kind of three tests, okay, that kind of say, okay, this is going with reality. And we'll go through these. The first one is logical consistency, or is it logically consistent? Fingers crossed I spelled consistency wrong. Maybe. We'll see. Logical consistency. So when you give me an answer, where did we come from? We know what logic is. Does it make sense? 1 + 1 is 2. If you're going 1 + 1 is 4, I'm like, okay, see ya. Logical consistency kind of speaks for itself, but does it logically follow a good pattern of thought? Does it make sense? Does 1 + 1 = 2 the way that you're telling it to me? The second one is empirical adequacy. Is empirical E or I? Does anyone know? I feel like I should know. I'm teaching the class. I told you I'm so bad at spelling. It's E. Hey, awesome. I always second guess myself when I'm spelling. Thank you so much. Okay. Empirical adequacy is the second one. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. Empirical evidence or adequacy means, can I hold it? Can I touch it? Is it empirical? Kind of means, does it have a form? Empirical adequacy is kind of saying, is there something outside of itself that can point back to it? Remember when I said you're not supposed to use the term to define the term? Okay, that's kind of a faux pas. You don't do that. This is kind of the same thing. If I have this magical holy book, and I tell you, man, this book is amazing, it's great, it's perfectly true, it's perfect all around, everything good comes from this book, and it tells you about reality, and you go, okay, cool. But if you ask me, well, how do I know that this book is true? And I say, well, because the book says so, and the book is perfect and it's real. That's not very logically consistent. Because then you just kind of, because then I go, well, it's just faith. Just trust me, this book is really true. It's real. You got to believe it, because I told you it's perfect, and the book says it's perfect, so it must be perfect, right? You're starting to see that kind of weird cycle where it's going, and that's why last week I kind of told you, and I didn't know how to define this, but as a second, third grader, when a guy gets up in chapel and says, I'm going to teach you how to tell your friends Jesus is true, and the Bible is real, and this is great, and he just opened the Bible, I was disappointed. And I know that sounds bad, like really bad as a pastor to say that, but I was disappointed because he was doing the same thing. He's saying, well, this book is true and it says it's true, so it must be true, right? And if this book says it's perfect because it is perfect, right? What if my friend doesn't believe in the Bible to begin? What if he doesn't believe it's necessarily a perfect book? What if he doesn't necessarily believe in God, and so he doesn't know that God wrote this, and it is a perfect book, actually? You need empirical evidence. You need something that's going, okay, well, this is kind of what suggests this might be a perfect book, too. Here's stuff that points to God, and this is how I can actually affirm and reaffirm my belief in this book. This is huge. And this is one of the things I love about my faith. If you read other religions, if you read other books, they kind of do this weird cycle where it's going, well, this guy was perfect, and he came, and he said this, and this is how we know it's all true and real. And we have that about Jesus, but the Bible is so rooted in reality, you can't take it out. It's not just weird quasi-spiritual other realm thing that's going on, because you can't really prove or disprove, this weird realm that you can't really see or hear or touch or feel. But the Bible's saying, guess what happened? This happened in this city, and then these guys came and they took them over, and these guys were slaves for a while, and then they got taken over, and they came out and they went to this city, and there's this mountain, and they were on this mountain. This is what happened at this mountain. And you know what? You can go and see this. Or this is what I love about the resurrection. So there's this guy, Jesus, and he was real because we have empirical evidence outside of just the Bible that says Jesus was a real guy who was alive at this time. And we say, here's the tomb, and you can go see where the tomb was, and nobody knows where the body was, and there's these guards that were guarding it, and they were Roman guards, which meant they knew what they were doing, but something went wrong, and you can go ask this person, this person, this person. Is it John? The book of John, he says, man, the people who are still alive to testify, you can go ask them. He's literally saying, you don't believe me? I got other people who are witnesses to this event. Your faith isn't just some spiritual thing that's out there. The Bible's rooted in reality. That's cool. That's really cool. Because that means we have empirical adequacy. We can say, what about this? What about this? What about this? And that's kind of what this class is about. We're going to stick with philosophy, but remember I told you there's 3 areas that apologetic kind of hits. We have the science, and we go, you know what? I see this and this and this, and this kind of seems to point to a creator, to a God. And we have history, and I can say, the Bible says this, and you know what we found over here? And archaeology has told us this, and the Bible has kind of told us this, and you know what? Bingo, they aligned up. And then we have philosophy. I can say, well, if you're going to say this and this and this must be true, then you know what? You kind of need a God to actually get to that point to begin with. And that's what we're about, is empirical adequacy. We'll move on. The third and final one is experiential relevance. Oh gosh, how do I spell it? Exper. Maybe. Yeah, okay. Experiential relevance simply means, can I experience the reality of the claim? Can you personally experience what I'm saying? Can you go out and experience? And this one's easy. Yeah, you can experience Jesus. And the thing that I love, this is really cool. When someone says, almost every time I hear someone tell their story about starting their relationship with Jesus, about getting baptized and starting their faith, it almost always begins or ends with, I don't know where I'd be today, and I can easily say that. I don't know where I'd be today because you got to experience it. It was something real that happened to you, and you're going, if I didn't have this, where Jesus came in at this point in my life, things would be different. I love that. I do want to say something. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, so just stay with me for a second. I feel particularly this generation, maybe the past 2, but really millennials, this generation, we tend to lean really heavily on experiential relevance when we want to prove our faith, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've listened to multiple debates with some of the leading guys. Does everyone know who Richard Dawkins is? He's probably the forerunner right now for atheism, or the new atheists is what they're kind of calling themselves. He's probably the forerunner, and I've heard him multiple times in debates with John Lennox, and I think Gary Habermas was one of them. But he says, actually Sam Harris said this too, if you know who that is, but they literally went, in the middle of a debate, I don't doubt that you had that experience. Someone would tell their experience, I've talked to Jesus, he changed my life, I don't know where I would be, I was in this pit and I came out, and nobody really seems to combat that. He literally goes, I don't doubt that you had that experience, and I don't want to take that away from you or diminish it. which is kind of crazy because they're in the middle of debating whether God exists or not. But he's not going to debate whether you experience something. There's a lot of power, but I find we put a lot of emphasis on experiencing things, and we tend to kind of shrink back from logical consistency and empirical adequacy or empirical evidence. We like experiencing things. It's really fun when you can feel Jesus, right? Or you feel close to God, then we're going, yes, my faith is real. But what happens when the experience starts to dip and dive? Because our emotions dip and dive. Our experience dips and dives. What happens in the valley when you're going, I just don't feel God. I don't get the goosebumps at worship anymore. Is God here? I'm just talking to a ceiling. Is God here? You know what gets me through those times? That. And the times where I'm going, how do I even know if God's here if I can't experience, if I can't feel the reality of it? If you don't have some evidence, if you don't have some consistency logically to back that up, good luck. I mean, you have your friends and family and the faith, and I sure hope they're there for you. They should be, biblically. But man, you know what helps me get through those moments, like the dark night of the soul was what they call it, is kind of knowing this. And I've told you, I'm losing count of how many times I've gone, kind of ran dry on that, and I'm going, how do I know I'm believing the right thing? What if I get it all wrong? And the thing that keeps pulling me back to Jesus and the Bible are those two. I kind of digressed a little, so we'll get back to this. What I want to do is kind of go through these and just kind of, we'll just kind of play practice. We'll do it with a worldview, just kind of fill them out and sort of make sense of how this works. Because I want you to know if you're speaking to someone, listening to somebody who has an opposing belief, maybe someone just asked you a question and you weren't even planning on it, you at least need to know how to kind of apply this. So here's what I'll say. We'll just take atheism as a worldview. And I mentioned last week, this class is going to be kind of Christianity versus atheism for the whole 8 weeks. Because North America, that tends to be the leading, predominant view that's antithetical to theism or Christianity. So this tends to be the most opposition that you will probably receive. I know there's others. Maybe you're going, well, my friend or my dad or uncle or whoever, they're Buddhist and okay, I know that those things exist, and we'll give you some resources if I can, as much as I can, to point you in good directions. But generally, especially in the public arena, this is the leading view that you're going to kind of come into opposition with. So we'll just take atheism real quick. So for origin, how did we get here? What would an atheist origin be? Be matter. So there's a bunch of eternally existent matter that just happened to be there. We'll get to that in a little bit. That's next week's. So there's a bunch of matter that just happened to be floating around, and then there's this crazy explosion that just by chance happened, right? So it's just, the chances are astronomical of it even happening. The explosion's happening, and this explosion just happened to be correct in order to build the amino acids and the proteins and the building blocks of life to, make the DNA. And then after millions and millions and millions of years, we're able to have a planet where life is sustainable. Then millions and millions of more years, we have organisms that are actually life that are able to reproduce. And you know the story. We mutate, and over a ton of time, ta-da! Here we are. So that's where we came from, according to an atheistic worldview. What then is the meaning of life? If all we got here is time plus chance plus matter, what does that mean the meaning of life is? Why are we here? Yeah, there's really no meaning. There's actually a term philosophically for this. It's called nihilism. I gotta learn how to spell, guys. That should be right. Maybe there's a nihil. There it is. Nihilism. There's a term for this philosophically. Does anybody know? Did I spell that right? You guys are my spell check. Do you see what I'm like without a computer? I'm just lost. Okay. Gosh, okay. Nihilism is basically a philosophy that it means nothing-ism. Ism is usually at the end of a word means study of, and nil, nil means nothing. So it's basically the philosophy of nothing, the study of nothing, ism. So this is dark. Like, this hurts my heart just reading about. You may have heard of some famous philosophers. I'll talk about some in a couple of weeks here that kind of prevailed this. Not Immanuel Kant. Who am I thinking of? I'll get to it in a couple weeks. But basically, this is saying, if this is true, logically, if I'm going to be logically consistent, ultimately there's no point in life. It was a chance. It was a big chance. And so there's nothing. But some may say, if you're going to argue this or talk to this with someone who does in fact believe in atheism, they may say, well, the point is survival, right? Survival of the fittest, prolong the species, make sure that you can survive, the planet survives, that life survives, that is the point of life. Now, really, sometimes I will give them that, but really, if you're going to push them back logically and being consistent, ultimately, there really is no meaning. Because even if you're going to say, well, survival of the fittest, that's what you must do. Why survive? Because now you're putting a meaning to life, right? You're saying, well, life is important, so we must prolong this life. The human species is important, so we need to preserve the race, right? But why? Where do we get our meaning? Where do we get, our worth from then? Ultimately, there really is none. But sometimes I will give them that just to play nice. Morality. So what's good? What is evil? How do we know? If we're just a big chance plus a lot of time, some random matter, there really is no other point to life, maybe surviving. How do I know how to treat somebody else? How do I know what good is, what evil is? Yeah, there is none, which is super scary. And we're going to talk about this in 2 weeks, is the morality argument, which basically hinges on this. Some may say this, though. If you give them survival and say, well, survival of the fittest, preserving the species, prolonging the human race as long as possible, that's the meaning of life. They may say, we know what morality is by the golden rule. And they'll say this, you'll hear it, because they'll go, well, man is a primate, that's a social primate, and that's how we live, that's how we do life. We need each other to survive. And so if you give them this, they'll say, and really, if you want to know how to treat each other, it's just treat somebody the way you would want to be treated, and that's ultimately what good and evil is. There's still some problems with that because it breaks down, because what if you want to be treated a different way than I do, and this. Some people say, utilitarianism, which is do the action that will cause the most good for the most people. That's kind of in the same, you'll probably hear both of those if you're ever listening to debate or talking with someone about it. They may pull that up. And finally, we'll keep moving on. Actually, real quick, I'll show you this. But when I was talking about most things break down with the coherence, this tends to be where atheism has the biggest problem sustaining itself. There tends to be enough people that will point scientifically to this fact, even though take that for what it is. And I might even give them that and say, okay, well, fine, science is pointing to this and this. But if this then is true, then what about this? Because most of the time they're going to want to put a meaning to life somewhere along the line. And most of the time they're going to say, well, you should not treat me this. You should not do this to that person. If God's so good, then why did he? This is where it tends to break down, is when it tries to cohere to itself. By itself, kind of makes sense, It's kind of okay on its own. I told you most things, they can kind of get by corresponding to reality. It's when they cohere amongst themselves that you're going, And finally, destiny, what happens when we die. We kind of did this last week when we talked about Pascal's wager. Nothing. None, nothing, whatever you want to put there. So, nothing happens. But this is basically atheism, just going through these four in a nutshell. Now, there's a whole lot to this, okay? You may have heard more, especially along these terms. We're making it very simple, very simplified, just kind of breaking it down. This is why it's important, though. If someone comes at me with a certain question and they're saying, well, what about this? How can you believe in God? I may need to know that this is what they believe, so I can go, well, you know what? You don't really believe in this. And the question you're asking me is actually about this. But if you start here and build your way logically, how can you even ask a question about morality? Because if God doesn't exist, it's kind of a free-for-all, right? And we'll talk more about that with morality, but these two kind of where things start breaking down. And it's important that you know this, because if you're going to talk to someone, you need to know, what do you believe at the base of your worldview about these four answers, so that I can, one, give you a satisfying answer to your question, and two, so I can actually just not start like rambling things off, because a lot of time our temptation is we feel attacked. And for good reason, sometimes it kind of is an attack, but people will feel attacked because they'll say, how can you believe this about God? And you'll just want to go, well, let me tell you. But if you kind of don't know why they're asking, if you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, you'll throw out an answer and they'll combat it with another answer. And then you'll throw out another answer and you get down this big snake hole because you forget to define the basics. You forget to define what the basics of their worldview are and what the basics of your worldview are, because 9 times out of 10 you can kind of subvert all these little kind of crazy, outskirtish debates that are just about like little things by just taking it back to the big four, the first causes. So that's why this is really important. We could do one more. Let's just do Christianity. Because like I said, some of us maybe have never really taken the time to define it. Christianity is really pretty satisfying when you're answering these 4 questions. Now, don't take this as me saying that there's not debate or hard questions to answer with these. There are. There's some really hard ones. I mean, the whole question of, if God's so good, why is there evil? Probably the hardest question to answer, right? The hardest. So let's just do Christianity. Where do we come from? In the beginning, God created. That one's pretty simple. If you're going to follow logically, consistently, what is the meaning? I mean, you can do some debate, but I say ultimately it's to worship God, give Him glory, give Him honor. Be stewards of the earth is part of that, but I'd say that's just worship too. By worship, I don't just mean singing, by the way. It's doing what you were created to do. And not just like 24/7 praising God, but I'm talking about you can worship God with your actions. You can worship God in the way that you work, the way you talk, the way you have fun, make friendships, doing what He created you to do. Morality is what's good, what is evil. Well, good is anything that aligns with the character of God, because He is good by definition. So anything that would then fall outside the character of God would be evil, is anything that's not God. And there's, we have the rules. There's the 10 Commandments, and you can, but at its most basic, this is what it is. And then destiny, what happens? Eternity. So you can either go heaven or hell. And like I said, there's some debate amongst people with some of this stuff, even if you are a Christian, even if you do believe in this and take it as fact. But at its basic, these are the 4 answers. So that's Christianity. I just want to give you guys kind of start thinking along that mindset of what is a worldview, what is this person's worldview, what is my own worldview, how does this hold up? If I'm going to be logically consistent with reality, if I'm going to look for empirical adequacy, how do these things hold up? If I'm going to experience, can I actually experience the reality of this claim? That's what you need to be thinking. Now, here's the thing I will say. You don't need to do this like every time you have a talk with someone. Because once you start getting in this mindset, you kind of already know. If you're going, okay, this person, they may not believe in God, okay. You kind of have this on the back burner, but you don't have to sit there and write it out and go, you believe in this, and you believe it. That's kind of absurd to do that. But if you get yourself training your mind in a way where you're going, all right, here's the 4 big questions. Here's the 2 tests, and do they kind of line up here? You can kind of start putting together kind of a roadmap, if you will, in your head that helps you out with that. I want to hit why this is so important, just real quick. It's because everybody has one. I said at the beginning. But if you leave with maybe just one little thing about worldviews, it's just know that everybody has one, and it's different. But it's important to understand what a worldview is behind the question that's being asked. Because remember, a worldview is a set of assumptions or assertions through which you assume the world operates, through which you view the world. So that means that there's a set of assumptions and assertions behind a question. And it's good to train your mind. It's good to start looking for what are these assertions, what are these assumptions, before you just start firing out answers to a question, because it might change the whole thing. So let's just, like it's no big deal, take the hardest question ever probably for Christianity. If God's so good, why is there evil? And we're not going to go in and answer all the things with this right now. But I do want to show you how this kind of works. So, and there's a couple ways that you'll hear this worded, so I'll just kind of make it very standard. But if God is good, or if he is 100% good, totally good, whatever the wording is there. If God is good, then why does evil exist? Why is there evil? That could be naturalistic evil. I'm talking about like the world as it is, why are there hurricanes and tsunamis and tornadoes and earthquakes? Why did he let this person do this to that person? How could he let this atrocity happen? We'll figure that out later. But really, dude? So if God is good, why is there evil? There's actually kind of a assumption behind that question. Does anyone know what it is, sort of? Okay. Yeah, some of it is God, but the if is kind of pointing, so it's saying, if I take the existence of God, then why? But what they're really assuming are this, that good and evil actually exist, which is kind of a morality and a meaning question. But if God doesn't exist, then how can you judge him on a moral code? We'll get into this third morality argument, but I'm basically telling you it in a nutshell, but you're going, well, wait a second. You're saying if God exists, evil definitely exists because you see it, and that's what you're basing your judgment off of God not being real, because evil surely wouldn't exist if God was real, right? But if all we have is time plus chance plus matter, then there's no meaning to life, and then there's said no real morality to life, right? But you're using a moral question to ask me about the existence of God in the first place. And we'll talk more about that, but it kind of falls apart because, so in this question is actually an assumption that doesn't really correlate to the opposing worldview that most of the time is behind this question. Let's do another one I'll show you, and this isn't per se related to worldview, but I want to show you how there's always an assumption or an assertion behind the question. I mentioned earlier kind of postmodernism. If you guys don't know what postmodernism is, it's really this. Postmodernism is kind of this thought process where they go, what if nothing really means anything? And you're like, okay, what? But let me explain. It kind of makes sense. What if I, growing up as a child, I see the grass, and my parents point to it and go, that's green. And I go, oh, and I see the same kind of color somewhere else, and I point to it and I say green, and they're like, good, you did it, buddy. And I learned my whole life that that's green, and I see the sky, and my parents point to it and they go, that's blue. And I see another color that's the same color as the sky, and I point to it, I go, blue, and they're like, yay, you did it. And my whole life I grew up learning that this particular color is green, and this color is blue. Now you grow up, you're a kid, and your parents point to the color of the grass, and they say, that's green. And you do the same thing, and you say green, and they go, yes, and they point to the sky, and they go, that's blue, and you say blue, and that's yes. Postmodernism kind of says, what if this? What if I was to get inside your body somehow and just look through your eyes and actually find out that the color you call green was my blue? But your whole life, you actually learned that that color was called green, so you think in your head that that's green. And I think in my head that that's green. We'll both point it and say green, and we'll go like, yep, that's green, that's green. But there's something reversed, and you actually are seeing blue, and I'm actually seeing like a green color. And so postmodernism kind of looked at that, and they go, what if nobody sees anything the same? But you just learned that that word was associated with that color. And so now words don't really mean anything, right? Because is that actually green then? If it's my blue, but you're green, it gets really confusing. But is that actually green? And they're going, no, words must not have meaning then. What if, like, you grow up your whole life thinking that this is a chair, and you've only seen pictures of a chair. I don't know where you live, but, just roll with me. So you see pictures, and you learn that this is a chair, and the thing that pulls up to it's a table. And I start telling you this story about how this person sat on the chair, and she broke it, and you're going, whoa, what a hefty woman that was. She broke the chair, but you're thinking of a table. And so you're picturing this. You get the whole story wrong, because your whole life you thought this was a chair, and the thing that slid under it was a table. And postmodernism goes, this world's crazy. Words must not have meaning, right? Here's the funny thing about it. I think postmodernism is stupid, by the way. If you don't, sorry, difference of opinion. But this is what they said. They basically posed this question. So they basically posed this question. This is kind of the basis of postmodernism. Do words have meaning? What's stupid about that question? It uses words to ask the question. Yeah, so all words except these 4 words have meaning, right? Because you need to at least understand what these words are for you to even understand the question that I'm posing. Furthermore, you can't write, talk, or really even think without using words in some form. So you're already assuming words have meaning to ask the question, do words have meaning? So you answered your question just by asking it. Okay, exactly. Or the fun one to do is someone say, do words have meaning? Or they'll say, oh, words don't have any meaning. I'll go, yeah, sure they do. No, I said they don't. Yeah, that's what you said. They have meaning. Because I'm just interpreting how I want, right? If words don't really have meaning, I can say whatever I want. See what I'm saying? It breaks down. It kind of fails 1,000 tests as it goes along. And it's not completely idiotic. Their reasoning behind it kind of makes sense. But this is what I want you to see out of this. There's always an assumption and a set of assertions about the way the world works behind a question. And sometimes your job is not to say, yes, they do, but to go, hold on, let me look at what you're assuming real quick and ask you this. Are you trying to use words to ask me that question? And they go, oh. Or if they say, if God's so good, why is there evil? You go, well, wait a second. Where are you getting your evil from? How do I define what good and evil is by which to judge God? If you believe this and this and this, and they're going, And I'm not saying that that's like the end all of apologetics, but it's important to understand what is going on behind a question. Because there's always a set of assumptions or assertions. Here's the last thing I'll say about it real quick. It's super important to understand somebody else's worldview when you're speaking to them. Because it's going to help you a lot, to at least get a basic understanding of what their worldview is. But the temptation with apologetics, the temptation with philosophy, when you're studying this stuff, is to do this. You're going to look at a person and you're going to say, worldview, okay. This is what you believe. So this is what you believe about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And you're going to paint this little picture in your head. And you're going to get this really cool list of philosophy and this really cool stuff for answers. And you're going to forget that you're talking to a person, or you're emailing a person, or reading the thoughts and words of a person. But this is why this is huge. Because sometimes when someone goes, if God's so good, then why did this? Sometimes there's a lot of pain behind that question. And sometimes we feel the attack and we're going, man, you're coming at me hard here, you're being belligerent, you're being rude, we feel attacked and we go into defense mode and we say, well, let me show you apologetics, boom! And we come busting out of the gates, ready to just plow people down, and we forget, man, what happened in your past that made you see things this way? Because sometimes behind the questions, there's not just assertions and assumptions, but there's actually experience. That experience can leave really deep scars. So before you go trampling people just to be right, or because you really, really want to prove your faith to them, kind of remember, I'm talking to a person. I'll tell you a story real quick. Before I moved here, I worked at a music store. I just graduated college. I got accepted to do my master's in apologetics, and my manager knew this. He knew I was passionate about it. I liked apologetics. And he came up to me one day and he said, "Rob, I got a question." Now, his name's Greg. Greg was a Christian. He went to church. I don't know how, great he was at it or anything, but it wasn't my place to judge. So I was like, "Yeah, Greg, what's going on?" He said, "My friend, he just left the faith. He just decided he's done with God. He's done with Christianity." I was like, "That's not good." He said, "Yeah." He goes, and even more, this guy worked at a Christian school. He taught kids. He taught kids the Bible. He's been doing this for 15 years. And he just decided he's done. He quit his job, doesn't go to church anymore. What do I say to him? I don't know what to do. I kind of thought about it for a second, and I said, "Greg, I can give you some really good answers for why God exists. I can give you some really good arguments that you could talk to him about, give you good books, good things to listen to, things he can listen to and look up." I said, "But I kind of find sometimes in these situations, there's something else going on." So I said, "Before I tell you any of that or give you any of that," I said, "There's something else going on." And he just looked at me. He's like, "Well, his wife of 20 years just divorced him." I said, "I think that's your problem. I don't know necessarily that it's the logic of does God exist. I don't know necessarily that it's the empirical evidence of, well, this points to God and this points to God. It's probably not even the experience of can you experience the reality of it. It's probably because this guy just got really, really hurt. And he's really mad." So when you understand worldviews, I want you to understand that. But more importantly, there's a person behind the assumption, behind the question. So I'll leave it there. If you guys have questions, feel free. I'll give you a couple minutes if you want to ask questions. If not, you're good to break up, talk about it, whatever. I do have resources if you guys want a couple of those or just want to check them out or start. You don't have to. Like I said, I wasn't even going to tell you about this till 2 weeks from now, but, change my mind. I can do that. I'm teaching. You're not. So other than that, thanks. If does anybody have a question real quick before I just let you go?
I have a list.
Uh-oh. I'll do my best. Let's try. Let's do one at a time. You've seen
some of your logical consistencies that you say.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you ask people why they believe or something, that some of the consistencies they seem to put aside and they just say, "I don't know, I just do."
Mm.
I don't care why.
You're talking about like somebody who believes differently.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to explain their faith.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had the heart sometimes to do that and just put it aside.
Yeah.
I truly wish I do because it's very tormenting sometimes.
Yeah.
I cannot make logical consistency out of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
The thing with good and evil, I heard an argument the other day, well, if God is perfect, how did he come up with evil in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
You can't create evil if he's not possible to be evil.
Right.
That's kind of like if God can do anything, can he make a rock so heavy you can't pick up? There's a lot of stuff that I can't answer. Some things I seem to be able to put aside, but when I hear people just shrug it all off and don't care and can't answer stuff, I sort of envy that, but there's no critical thinking, no critical thinking applied. Why?
That's a great question.
Is that acceptable in terms? Can we just say, doesn't matter, I'm going to believe anyway?
I think it's okay in a sense, but I'm very scared of saying that because Jesus never said, "Let me prove to you I'm real, then take up your cross and follow me." Or he didn't show up to Peter and said, "Hey, here's why I'm right. All right, let's go." He just said, "You coming?" And he said, "Yeah." Now, Jesus proved he was God amongst that, so it's a little different. But I think you can believe the right thing and not know why you believe it. But it doesn't mean like the process that you got to that point. Does that make sense? I'm trying to be careful with what I tried here. I think it's important that you understand why, especially if you're going to talk to someone else and say, I think this is true and this is why I know. But if you go, I think this is true, I believe it, so it must be real, right? That's not very good at helping them along in that journey. Now someone says, I don't know why this isn't for me. I just believe what I believe. That's hard because if you're talking to someone about Jesus, but they don't believe in Jesus, let's say they believe in Muhammad or whomever, Allah, and they go, well, I don't know, but I just believe because I believe. You'd be pretty frustrated with that.
And I feel like they look at me and go, well, then you're a knothead. You know,
Yeah.
How can you do that?
Yeah, so there is some tension in that, and I'm not, like I said at the beginning, knowing this doesn't make you a better Christian than the person who doesn't. But I think it helps you be a better evangelist. I think it helps you help others better. I think it helps me personally, helps myself be a better Christian.
And in the end, isn't that all that we're, even though that we're supposed to go out and disciple and try to, spread his word.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the Great Commission.
We're only, in the end, it's just us.
Mm-hmm.
But if I still have questions, is that bad? If there's things that I cannot answer?
I would say no, and here's why. We'll talk about this next week with first causes. I mean, one, nobody really knows what happens when you die, because there's stories of this person died and came back, but there's a lot of debate over, well, that's not real, and so I tend to let that be. And two, I mean, nobody was there at the creation of the world to go, hey, let me tell you what happened. And God, Jesus was. But when it comes down to it, you either believe that matter was eternally existent or there's a being who is eternally existent. That's the two first causes. So there's faith on both sides. It's not like you only have faith and the other people don't. They have science. Or next week is Science versus God. We'll talk about that. Are they compatible? Are they incompatible? So you got to believe what you believe, you know what I mean? We'll get into that a little bit later, but there's faith on both sides.
Isn't that where your experience comes in?
There is, and that's why experience is one of them. But I don't like relying on solely experience, because people have a lot of different experiences. I've known guys who tripped on some weird drugs, and they told me some weird stuff, and they believe it full-heartedly, and I'm going, all right, dude, if that's what you think, and that's where it comes into, I don't doubt you experienced that, because we really don't like bashing somebody else's experience. That tends to be sacred ground, but there's a lot to that, and the whole last week is basically, I'm going to spoil so much on my class. Okay. Part of my thing is I think some of your greatest apologetic isn't necessarily knowing all this wholeheartedly, but it's your story. I think that's probably one of your biggest apologetics in the end, and that's your experience. And part of your experience is going, I still sometimes got questions. I have questions sometimes still, and I preach this stuff. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. Yeah.
I feel like God has revealed himself to me, absolutely, but yet I still there's things I cannot explain, have no idea.
Yeah.
I never feel like in my lifetime explain.
When you come down to it, I mean, people say this, you probably realize, but the more you study, you realize the less you know. This isn't going to get you to a spot probably where you go, I know it all. But it got me to a spot where it's going, I had some doubts, and this helped me get by those, and it helped a lot. Are there still things I don't know? Yeah, because there's things on this side that I just can't. There's things on this side you just can't. And that's kind of where that wager from last week sort of comes in. Some things you being you with your limitations will never know.
The Bible explains, it says, I am God, so my ways are higher than your
Right.
ways, and you're not. But the big question when you talk about atheists versus Christians is the next thing the atheist is going to say, well, okay, where did God come from?
Yes. Well, we'll get to that with some of the ontological argument at the end. I told you, I got a pretty decent plan if I don't give it all away beforehand. Yeah.
Are you going to touch on faith at all, the faith walk and all of this? Is that a part of apologetics?
Well, it is, but I'm not going to cover it just because we have 8 weeks to go through a ton of stuff. And my goal is just to give you not even, I mean, I told you this isn't full-fledged worldview, but I gave you as much as I could and did the best I could, is to do that for each week so you can go, that resonated. Let me learn about this. Let me listen to this.
Help this gentleman out just a little bit, though. That works for me a whole lot with people when I talk about the faith walk. It is,
Yeah.
a lot solely, 90% based on faith when you think about it. And I was at a dinner party recently in New York, and all these successful people were sitting around, and I did a simple thing that I've done my whole 60-plus years. I folded my hands and I started to pray about my food.
Yeah.
That's what I was taught since I was a kid. And I looked up and I was getting ready to eat, and the whole table was staring at me. And so the one woman who's been my friend for over 40 years, Nan, she goes, "Michael, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just blessing my food." And she said, and then another friend, all these people I've known for over 40 years, most of them, and Renald looks across the table, he goes, "Michael, you still believing in those Jewish fairy tales?" So, the rest of the night, I felt like I was on display. But I won my argument, I felt, by eventually going to the faith thing, asking them, what do you believe in, and how do you know it's true, and blah, blah, So I was really interested in this apologetics thing, because I thought, I can't wait to get back up there. I'm going to really have me some ammunition.
Hey.
I can't wait.
We'll give you some good stuff to doodle. I want to hear about it. That'll be fun. Cool.
I was at a funeral this weekend, and I am surrounded by, and I knew going in, my husband prayed all weekend for me, that it was highly educated, professional atheists. The funeral was a nightmare for me. But you know what I found interesting, what I took away from it that I had no idea I would, was I almost had the urge, it was really a memorial service, to chuckle in a sad way, because they're using all these words like grace and, well, with all my soul, this and that, and I'm thinking, what are you talking about, soul? They use all this stuff and say all this stuff, and it's like, they almost believe.
Yeah.
And, they don't even realize, even though they're all atheists, it was just the terminology and the things they said. And at one point they were talking about him. He sailed all the time, the man that passed, and he kept in the sailboat and all that, did all this stuff, and how they were in big trouble, and they tried to start the sailboat, it had motors and all this, and millions of times, and nothing worked, and they tried everything, and all of a sudden, oh, good fortune, the boat started, and I'm thinking, they just don't, it was a miracle, well, and they called it a miracle, it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, duh, God, but it was really weird, but it kind of made me think, there's not that far between atheism and believing.
Yeah, who was it that wrote, "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist"?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, who was that? That was just going to kill me now. But yeah, there's faith on either side, and now we'll talk about the term faith. They get really up in arms about, no, that's a religion thing. But at the end of the day, you have faith in what you believe, whether you know it or not. At the end of the day, your worldview answers the 4 big questions, whether you've actually thought through the consistency of those or not. And we'll talk more about where those kind of break down. But a lot of people want the meaning in life, and they want the morality in life, the good stuff, but they don't want to deal with the God behind it or the person behind those things. So that tends to me to be the big difference, is they still want to pull the good stuff of religion and then leave the bad stuff that they can't deal with or don't want to. So I don't mean to say like they know God exists necessarily and they're purposely rejecting it, but philosophically, that tends to be what happens. So anyway, is there any last question? I know I got to wrap up pretty soon so I can get ready for all my middle schoolers. Fun, right? Everyone's like, oh, don't maybe you.
Ask that question unless you got a couple hours. Actually, you should just follow me around for a couple weeks.
I could have used them this weekend, I will tell you that.
Every time there's one, I'll come up with one.
Y'all gonna need to give me a raise.
Address his
Yeah.
comment about the creation of evil by a perfect entity.
Yes.
And I'm a logical person, and if an evil was invented, existed before Earth existed, because Satan was in heaven doing his thing, and I never want to say if I was God, but if God was God and he wanted followers that loved in faith, the creation of evil allows that to happen. Otherwise, we can't love in faith. We're just blindly following. So I always thought that evil is actually a sin.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, I'll make it super quick. That's where I land usually. If people ask about that, and let's say God is God and he creates everything. If we're in here and this is his will, the absence of us having a will would be we can't do evil, right? Essentially robots for all intents and purposes. But if we have a gate or a way outside of God's will, which anything that falls outside the God's will, that's what I said when we did morality, is evil, right? So anything that falls outside the character of God, essentially what I say is it true love if I have no choice? I mean, I think most people would agree, like, no, if I have no choice but to do the things I do for you, with you because of you, that's not really love, that's programming. If I have a way out, but I choose here, that's love.
It's the book of Job.
Yeah, exactly. This is how love exists, is God saying, I will make will, so I'll make the capacity for evil. Not saying he made evil, but he made you with the choice to choose him or to reject him. To reject the character of God is to choose evil, to choose death. So that's how I answer that, is I see it as, we usually like the whole we have a choice thing. So it's either you have a choice, and God kind of built that in because he's going, this is a love thing, or you don't have a choice, and the alternative is he made evil and just said, I don't like you. So that's kind of scary. But I don't find that in the Bible, if that helps. That's how I see that. That's really quick. We can get into that stuff later. You guys are good at tangents. This is fun. So I do have to wrap it up, but if you have more questions, we can talk. I'm here all week. I don't know if I get paid enough to follow you around all week, but I'll do what I do. So, other than that, yeah, exactly. Take note. But other than that, I'll tell you. Right. All right. I'll tell you guys when we get the videos posted. But thanks for coming. If you want to stay and chat, you have a couple minutes. But I just need to get stuff ready out here. So, thank you guys. Have a great day.